Good morning, everyone. If you did not get the handout for this morning called Judges 19, Gibeah, Benjamin becomes Sodom and Gomorrah, raise your hand and somebody will get you a copy. I can't because I'm busy right now. They're on the visitors table, welcoming table, that thing out front. If you did not get the handout called The Fourfold Fall of a Nation, Judges 17 through 21. You need it because it details there's a fall of religion, there's a fall of morality, a fall of family, and then a fall of society, which leads to the fall of a nation. And in these last 5 chapters, our goal is to find those failures, and it's going to be pretty obvious what it is in Judges chapter 19. We are almost at the end of our study of Judges. We started off talking about how Judges is a book of grace. It's hard to find any room for grace in these last several chapters. The only thing that we can say is even if we don't find it in here, we will find it before this and later on. The heading in my Bible says for chapter 19, Outrage in Benjamin. I would not have chosen that particular title for this. Outrage comes at the very end, but there's a whole lot of things that are happening before that. That works. That works. I would have chosen the Gibeah Benjamin becomes Sodom and Gomorrah, which is the name of the handout that I've got. You have probably heard the phrase that it was easier for God to take Israel out of Egypt than for God to get Egypt out of Israel, right? Okay. Have you heard the phrase Rome conquered Greece and then Greece conquered Rome? Yes? When you look at that last part, Greece conquered Rome, what they often mean is Rome ended up adopting the same gods that they had, just giving them Latin names. Much of their culture, their philosophy, they borrowed from Greece. And it has actually also been argued that some of the sexual ethics that was practiced in Greece became more prominent within Rome, and in that way, Greece conquered Rome. When you look at the book of Judges, we could say this: Israel conquered Canaan, and then what? Canaan conquered Israel. That's the story throughout the book of Judges, that they would be faithful for a while, and then they would start following after false gods. That is the first step in the fourfold fall of a nation, the degradation of religion, where they would constantly break the first command and the second command of the 10 Commandments. But we're going to see that it is not just a religious failure, it's also going to be a moral failure. And you could even say a family failure, because you're going to have the Levite having a concubine instead of having her as his wife, and the situation that is going on is just reminiscent of another story in the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah. If you look at your handout, we'll be getting to all of the comparisons between that old story of the time when Israel was beginning through Abraham to when we've got it during the time of the judges. Now, the name Sodom and Gomorrah, but mainly Sodom, is a name that has become infamous. It's one of the most oft-repeated names of a city within the Bible. Babylon is mentioned more, Jerusalem is mentioned more. I'm not exactly sure where it falls, but if you look at the handout that I gave to you, you'll find that Sodom is mentioned 47 times in the Bible, and Gomorrah is mentioned 23 times. And the names of their cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, was foreshadowing their end, because Gomorrah means a heap, a ruined heap, and Sodom means burnt. And I took some of the scriptures, and they're on here also. I wanted to read them to you so we could get again a idea of how inspiration views Sodom. And then you remember Sodom was a pagan nation, but then Israel is going to be imitating them in horrific ways. And these stories we're going to see are very much patterned after one another. I'll say it again and again and again. The Bible keeps telling the same stories over and over again, just with different characters, different situations. But we've got Genesis chapter 13:13. Now the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked sinners against the Lord. Genesis 18:20. And the Lord said, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. Deuteronomy 29:23. All its land is brimstone and salt, burned debris, unsown and unproductive, and no grass grows on it. Like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zebulun, which the Lord overthrew in his anger and his wrath. Deuteronomy 32:32. For their vine is from the vine of Sodom, and their fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are grapes of poison, their clusters bitter. Isaiah 1:10. Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Listen to the instruction of our God, you people of Gomorrah. And when he says that in Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 10, is he actually talking to Sodom and Gomorrah? Yeah, it's a parallel. He's talking to Israel, and he's calling them Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, if there's one or two cities that you did not want to be called, it'd be Sodom and Gomorrah. Yet even during the time of Isaiah, which is during the time of the northern kingdom had already been taken away, the southern kingdom, you have Hezekiah, a righteous king, but there were some that were not righteous before him, such as Manasseh, and not righteous after him. But they are called Sodom and Gomorrah. Isaiah 3:9. The expression of their faces testifies against them, and they display their sin like Sodom. They do not even conceal it. Woe to them, for they have done evil to themselves. Which is an interesting phrase, because we hear of certain, quote, crimes where there are no victims. And that is a misnomer. I'm not sure there's what the exact phrase is. Maybe some of you know what it is, but is it just victimless crimes? Is that the phrase? You probably have all heard of victimless crimes. That is a misnomer. Every crime, every sin has a victim. Who is it always includes? The sinner himself. You're hurting yourself when you sin. They've done evil to themselves. Jeremiah 23:14. Also among the prophets of Jerusalem I've seen a horrible thing, the committing of adultery and walking in deceit. And they strengthen the hands of evildoers so that no one has turned back from his wickedness. All of them have become to me like Sodom, and her inhabitants like Gomorrah. When did Jeremiah prophesy? You don't have to give me a date, but when within the existence of the southern kingdom did Jeremiah prophesy? Yeah, just before, during, and after the fall. And so he is saying the southern kingdom has become like Sodom, and her inhabitants like Gomorrah. Lamentations 4, verse 6. For the wrongdoing of the daughter of my people is greater than the sin of Sodom, which was overthrown as in a moment, and no hands were turned toward her. It's kind of hard to imagine a sin greater than the sin of Sodom. But why would you suggest that God says in the book of Lamentations that his people have committed the greater sin?
Experienced worldly blessings from God.
They were God's people. They received his blessings. They received his knowledge. They knew better. You could not accuse them of not being recipients of God's grace or God's law. Ezekiel 16:46. Now your older sister is Samaria, who lives north of you with her daughters, and your younger sister who lives south of you is Sodom with her daughters. And you go to the New Testament, you see the same ideas. And you, Capernaum, will not be exalted to heaven, Matthew 11:23. Will you? You will be brought down to Hades. For if the miracles that occurred in you had occurred in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. That might be the most damning statement that you can say about anybody. That Jesus did miracles among his own people. They refused him, but if those miracles had been done in Sodom, they would have repented. That is pretty damning. Luke 10, verse 12. I say to you, it'll be more tolerable on that day for Sodom than for that city. Again, the greater responsibility. 2 Peter 2, verse 6. And if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction by reducing them to ashes, having made them an example of what is coming for the ungodly, so on and so forth. Now, if we were to make a comparison between Sodom and Gomorrah and Jerusalem, or God's people, America would be which one? It'd actually be Sodom and Gomorrah. The church would be Jerusalem, because we have more responsibility, because we receive God's blessings. We receive God's grace. And yet, do you ever see God's church behave worse than maybe outside in the world? Yeah, sometimes. And we think, no, that could never happen. Who has the greater responsibility? God's people, always. So we might think of, Sodom and Gomorrah, yeah, that's the word, America, how horrible, how horrible, how horrible. Well, we're more comparable like Jerusalem, God's people. And which one had the greater condemnation? God's people, always. But which is easier? To look out at the world and see how horrible they are and condemn them and just think we're better than them, or to look at ourselves and realize we fall short often too? See, this is supposed to be humbling when we realize that God's people can be said to be worse than Sodom and Gomorrah when they are not doing what they should. Now, when Jesus was talking to the nation of Judea and talking about Jerusalem and so forth, and said that Jerusalem was worse than Sodom and Gomorrah? Was he talking about how Jerusalem was just guilty of all kinds of sexual sins? No. But that's what we often tend to do, isn't it? We look at sexual sins as the worst type of sin that you can commit. But it's not. Jerusalem was not guilty of that. But they were condemned even worse. God's people in Judges chapter 19 are going to be like Sodom and Gomorrah. Israel conquered Canaan, but Canaan conquered Israel. We could also add this idea. Christianity conquered America, but then America conquered Christianity. Can you think of any ways that American Christianity has fallen short of the ideal? We could make a long, long list. We really could. We've always got to make sure that we look at the Word of God as our guide and not comparing ourselves to the world as our guide. And that's the danger. Anybody on the introduction to Judges chapter 19? There is always a warfare going on. Okay.
He says we're going to the house of the Lord. Where was that?
That would be the tabernacle in Shiloh. Anybody else? Okay. I hope you've read Judges 19, but if you hadn't, you just might be shocked at how similar this is to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Just give me a second. I got to take out my handout so I could get to it. In order to keep it on 2 sheets of paper, so front and back, I had to make the print small, and maybe I shouldn't have done that because I had to make the margins wide, which maybe cut out some of the print. Okay. What now? I just took it out. So thanks. Okay. You will look at this, and I tried to color code it, all the similarities and the exact parallels, but there are also some differences between them. And what I should have done was I should have counted all the similarities and the exact parallels. But okay, so you look on the left side. So they continued on their journey, and the sun set as they neared Gibeah and Benjamin. Go back to Genesis chapter 19. The 2 angels entered Sodom in the evening. So same time. Verse 15, back in Judges 19. They stopped to go in and spend the night in Gibeah. This is the Levite and the concubine. And you look in the account in Genesis chapter 2, where they were to spend the night. It said that a couple times. You look back in Judges 19, verse 15. There is a scene that happens at the city square. Genesis chapter 19. There is a situation that happens in the square. Back in Judges chapter 19, you've got an old man saying, I will take care of everything. And he brought him into his house. In Genesis chapter 19, verse 2, Lot says to the angels, my lords, turn aside your servant's house and wash your feet. You look in Judges chapter 19, verse 21, they ate and drank. And in Genesis chapter 19, Lot prepared a feast and baked unleavened bread for them, and they ate. You look in Judges chapter 19, while they were all enjoying themselves, all of a sudden wicked men of the city surrounded the house. In Genesis chapter 19, it says in verse 4, going back to Sodom and Gomorrah, they surrounded the house. In Judges chapter 19, in verse 22, they said, bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him. You look in Genesis chapter 19, verse 5, send them out to us so we can have sex with them. Judges chapter 19, verse 23, the owner of the house went out. Genesis chapter 19, verse 6, Lot went out to them. Verse 23, please don't do this evil, in Judges chapter 19, verse 23. Genesis 19, verse 7, don't do this evil. In Judges chapter 19, this man has come under my house or come into my house. Genesis 19, and in verse 8, because they have come under the protection of my roof. Judges 19, verse 24, let me bring out my virgin daughter and the man's concubine now, abuse them and do whatever you want to them. Genesis 19 and verse 8, look, I've got 2 daughters who haven't been intimate with a man. I'll bring them out to you and you can do whatever you want to them. Judges chapter 19, verse 26, she collapsed at the doorway of the man's house. And in Genesis chapter 19, they struck the men, the angels did, they struck the men who were at the entrance of the house. Same story, right? There's some differences, but how many similarities and parallels were there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, maybe 14 or 15 similarities between those 2 stories. What are we supposed to learn from the Holy Spirit recording both of these stories? And recording them with so many similar details. What are we supposed to learn from this?
Scripture, it seems to be more important.
Okay. This is repeated. Pay attention. It's important. Anybody else? What are we supposed to learn from this? Is there a warning here? What's the warning? It can happen to you. This happened to those that were not God's people. Genesis chapter 19. This happened to those that were God's people. Judges 19. Have you ever heard somebody say, I could never do that? And they're talking about somebody else. And then you say, I could never do that. That sin is so horrific. I could never be guilty of that. What can often happen to that person? They could commit that same sin. When you read the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, you could say, yeah, they were wicked men. But maybe they didn't know better. When you look at God's people in Genesis or Judges chapter 19, is there any way you could say they didn't know better? The law was given. They might have forgotten it. But the law was given to them. They should have known better. You could say, well, the people Lot, Sodom and Gomorrah, they should have known better, maybe by natural law. But by divine law, God's people should have known better. Any questions or comments or disagreements? Okay. Well, let's start in verse 1 and go through it, because that was just verses 14 through 26. Okay, this is again the epilogue, which is the conclusion. You're going to see a repeated theme, chapter 17 and verse 6. In those days there was no king in Israel. Chapter 18, verse 1. In those days there was no king in Israel. Chapter 19, verse 1. In those days when there was no king in Israel. And the book is going to end with, everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and there was no king in Israel. And what is going on in Judges 19 is doing what is right in their own eyes. Okay, we're going to have another story about another Levite. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a Levite staying in a remote part of the hill country of Ephraim acquired a woman from Bethlehem in Judah as his concubine. I will freely admit I cannot figure out all of the differences between a, quote, wife and a concubine, because concubines were sometimes called wives. It's almost as if, this is about the only way I could think of it, is you've got your legal wife, and then you've got your wife. Not quite a wife, but she's still called a wife. And this was contrary to God's law. God did not intend this. But did even some of God's godly men fall into this sin of having concubines? A lot of them. Can y'all think of any good godly men that fell into having concubines? Abraham. Anybody else? David. Solomon. And so this is just another example of God's people following the mores of the nations instead of being the bright light that they were supposed to be. Now, verse 2. This translation says, she was unfaithful to him. And most translations say that she was unfaithful to him. For some reason, and I did some study on it and I can't figure it out, the New American Standard 2020, the update, has he was repugnant to her. And the only possible explanation is that the word unfaithful could refer to a root word that has to do with angry, being angry. But most of your translations, I think the ESV, the older NASB, the NIV, the CSB all say, she was unfaithful to him, which they have a messed up relationship, as we're going to see. Bruce, and then Jared.
My ASV version you checked out the other day.
Yeah.
It says, and his concubine played the harlot against him.
Yeah. That's one of the ways it can be translated. Yeah. Which is, in some ways, and maybe even worse if you want to categorize sins than just being unfaithful. Jared, was your hand raised?
Hebrew literally says she played the part of a prostitute. So obviously that's used very metaphorically a lot in Scripture and even here. I don't know if it's I don't know if it is merely descriptive here, But it is telling that she is the concubine, so she's the side piece basically. She's the second wife, and she left and went back home. It almost seems like perhaps she was tired of being the second wife, or the relationship was messed up in some way or something. Again, I don't know if that was just descriptive or if we should understand that in that context. But.
Now, if the translation is correct, that she was unfaithful, she played the harlot, she prostituted herself. Now, this is about to sound weird, what I'm about to say, okay? But I really don't know how else to say this. I find his actions, the Levites, unfathomable, what he did to his concubine. But from a non-Christian perspective, if your concubine was out there playing the harlot on you, then it might be a little bit easier for you to rationalize to do what he did.
Get his virgin daughter.
That to me is even more unfathomable.
And I'm mad every time I read this.
Yes. Okay, let's discuss that right now, even though it's later on in the text. Why would, and this happened in Genesis 19 and in Judges 19, the same event, basically, why would a father be willing to have his daughter so grossly mistreated in order to protect a stranger in his house?
In that culture.
Yeah.
And I think it's culture maybe protecting those men, but for me, as with Retha, it's unfathomable. I mean, my husband did that with my daughters. I would throw him out there with them.
Yeah. Bruce.
Those angels in Lot's house, they could have taken care of the situation. When they chose, could they not?
Well, they did. And, nothing happened there. Unfortunately, in Judges chapter 19, she was continuously raped.
And just says, let's go.
I know.
She's laying there dead, and he's mad because she's dead, probably. Was she dead? She didn't have such a she's dead.
Well, he cuts her up. We know that. It says there was no response. Oh. Yep, and took her to his house. Okay, the only explanation I've ever heard is that that culture valued hospitality to such a degree that if even your enemy came into your house, they were under your protection. And nobody could harm even your enemy. Now, this again is unfathomable to us, but it shows us this valuable truth. And that is it possible to adopt the morals of a society and think you're being righteous and doing right, and yet be extremely contrary to God's law? Yeah. I think this is an example of that.
Totally messed up.
You just stop right there. It's totally messed up.
Priority of honor and shame.
Yeah.
Yeah. We think of cultures right and wrong. Their cultures were honor and shame. And if somebody came under your protection, that was you honoring them, and if you mistreated them, that would bring shame upon you and your house. Again, we can't fathom this.
Dollars still?
In that culture, yeah.
As possessions, they weren't valued so much as people. Although I know there are examples where they were.
Even in the book of Judges, you have a woman who is greatly valued, such as Eska, the daughter of Caleb. She was a woman worth fighting for, is one of the ways I've kept saying it, which is why Othniel went and conquered so that he could marry her. When you follow God's law, women are always highly valued. When you follow the ethos of other cultures, women have often lost their value. Even when you go to the days of Jesus, who did he often lift up? Women. Yeah. And it's because they have been torn down. And so he lifts them up and puts them back in their proper place of value. Anybody else? Yes.
And, God invented men to protect their lives and their families. And so it seems like, that was something they were proud of. And to not be a man would be just to let something happen to your family and not protect them. And we're that way here. A man always protects his wife and his family. He wouldn't let anything happen to him. So that's why it's so hard to see him throwing her out like that.
Well, remember the fourfold fall of a nation: religion, morals, family, society, leads to the fall of a nation. And while Israel does not fall, they're continuously falling in this book of Judges. And eventually they will fall to the point of exile. Go ahead, Johnny, then over here.
Well, of course, it's not justified, but these men could have been acting, the fathers could have been acting in sheer fear of the homosexual, sexual perverted community, just as it was then. Same today. Look what happens when Christians or what is right stands up against the homosexual, sexually perverted community. It gets you killed. Look at our schools that have been shot up by the trans, and the recent murder of a well-known celebrity. He was shot and killed. So these men may have been acting, of course, I'm not justifying it,
Right.
sheer fear of trying to appease this community.
It is a scary thing to become like the world. It really is. And not stand up and be courageous. That's something that is found in the book of Joshua. Be a man. Stand up and be courageous. And yeah, men are created by God to protect. In fact, you find that in Genesis chapter 2. Not all translations say it. Let's see, where is it that... I hate it when I can't remember. God put man in the garden to, where is it? Verse 5, no. Verse 8. Yeah, that's the verse I'm looking for. 15. Then God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to work it and watch over it. Watch over it is the idea of guarding it. And when you look at, quote, the original sin, oftentimes people say, well, the original sin is eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, you go back before that, God accused Adam of listening to his wife instead of leading her. But you go back before that, he was given the responsibility of guarding the garden. But what snuck into the garden? The serpent. So maybe there's some fault there too. Yes, Shirley.
When I think about the society today and I think about this happening in Judges where he dismembers his concubine into 12 pieces, I mean, that's horrific. But when you think about today and you think about aborting an innocent baby, and they go in and they suction that baby out, or they cut it up so they can get it out, and they dismember it. They sell its body parts at times. Are we any better?
We always got to look at ourselves and say, we got to keep on looking at ourselves.
We're misinterpreting what his actions there, right? It says that he cut up her body and sent it throughout the territory of Israel and commanded the men whom he sent, saying, "Thus shall you say to all the Israelites, has such a thing ever happened since that the Israelites came up from the land of Egypt until this day? Consider it, take counsel, and speak out." This was a man who was grieving and condemning Israel, right? Through this action?
Yes.
This was a condemnation on Israel.
And you look at it and think it over, discuss it, and speak it up is in direct opposition to, in those days there was no king in Israel. And he's and chapter 20 is going to be about revenge for what has happened. Now, whether she was dead or not, I hadn't thought about that. I assume she was when it says that she did not respond. But whatever is going on, this is one of the most despicable chapters in the history of Israel. Jared.
Can we just run back real quick to what we were talking about with the father offering his daughters up?
Yes.
Because to go along this same vein about this being a terrible time in Israel, Alan brought up accurately so the honor and shame culture, and I think that because it's so different from what we understand, I think maybe we don't fully understand the position that father was in. When a society is so depraved, people end up making choices that they think are the best choice, but are still depraved choices and still terrible choices and terrible outcomes. The most likely reason for that father to offer up his daughters is that if his guests had been raped, and if his male guests had been raped with homosexual rape, not only would that have brought shame on the person who was actually physically attacked, it would have brought shame on his family to the point where it would have been an existential crisis for his family. This father is going, we may no longer survive if we allow this to happen in our house. Therefore, because of our culture and how it treats women, it is a safer bet for them to rape my daughters than it is for them to rape my guest. And maybe we'll survive this. It's a desperate man doing desperate things, taking what he probably views as the least horrible option, but as we can sit here today and look at it, we understand that that even someone who's trying to do the right thing was put in a situation and doing something that we would view as horrible because of the depravity of the land.
It's more complicated than probably I know, but maybe this is an oversimplification. Like I said, we don't live in an honor-shame society. We live in a right versus wrong society. And I think that the right-wrong is a better ethic than the honor-shame, because in honor-shame, that's horizontal. Honor and shame among your nation. Right and wrong, that is right or wrong vertically between God and yourself. And of course, if you do what is right in a good culture, you will receive honor. But I think that was one of the failures, and that is, how am I going to be viewed among my people, which is not the main goal. How does God view me?
Problem with our culture. There's no moral compass that shows that right and wrong. They twist and say that which is right is wrong and that which is wrong is right. It's no different today.
Which is why we got to keep looking at ourselves and say, this could happen to me. Okay, we will...
If the rot went with the religious leaders, with the lay people, everybody did what was right in their own eyes and said what was right was wrong and wrong was right.
But again,
We have to be careful.
read the paper I gave you on the fourfold fall of a nation. Religion, morals, family, and then the nation falls. We will continue with chapter 19 on Wednesday. We are on schedule, believe it or not, to finish on time. It might be a first.